Buenas and half a day, everyone. Good morning. This virtual informational hearing by the Committee on Air Transportation, Parks, Tourism, Higher Education, and the Advancement of Women, Youth, and Senior Citizens is hereby called to order. Today is Thursday, October 14th, 2021, and the time now is 10:02 a.m. For the record and in accordance with open government law, notices for this hearing were sent on October 7th, 2021, and again on October 12th, 2021. In addition, this hearing was noticed in the Guam Daily Post on October 12th, 2021, and on the Guam Legislature's website. Joining me this morning are my colleagues, committee members, Senator Mary Camacho Torres and Senator Teloti Taidagui. Welcome, Siduas Masi, for joining us. Before we proceed with the discussion of items on our virtual informational hearing agenda, I'd like to first provide some general rules of conduct for all in attendance. The conduct of this hearing shall be as follows. All must abide by the rules of conduct and quality assurance standards. Please keep your video on at all times and ensure that you are in a room with little to no interruptions and adequate lighting to ensure that we can see the participant's face. When speaking, please ensure that you are unmuted and that you are speaking into your microphone. The chair will invite individuals to speak, and we ask that you please state your name and your position for record purposes. After today's presentation, we will then have questions from the panel, and the chair will call on members of the body to ask questions. Questions and testimony shall be confined to the substance and nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to the character or motive of any senator or any individual testifying is not permitted. Any violations of this general rule of conduct will result in removal from the meeting room. I'd also like to recognize my colleague, Senator Joanne Brown, Siduas Masi, for joining us. And I'd like to welcome our partners from the Guam International Airport Authority. Good morning to former Senator and Executive Manager of the AB Wampat International Airport Authority, John M. Kinata, and Deputy Executive Manager, Dr. Ricky Hernandez, Siduas Masi, and all members of your team who are joining us in the Zoom room today. This virtual informational hearing with the AB Wampat International Airport Authority will serve as a forum for the legislature to receive updates on the operations and projects undertaken at our island's commercial airport. For 45 years, the GIAA has paved the way for Guam's economic growth, helping to support key economic sectors such as tourism and military spending. The airport has and continues to be an integral part of our island's progress and as our connection to the world. And amid a global pandemic, the airport has also remained our first line of defense against the coronavirus, working with key partners to ensure the safety of our island's people. As the chair on air transportation, I look forward to our continued collaboration and partnership with GIAA to work together to ensure that the airport is equipped to continue providing necessary air travel services to our people and visitors. It's going to take our collective efforts to rise from our current economic downturn brought on by this pandemic and find new ways to develop resilience. This morning, we have invited the team at GIA to provide updates on their COVID-19 response, finances and operations, capital improvements, and plans for the future. I am looking forward to our discussions today and hope that we can shed light on the good work being done at GIA and work together to support and equip them with the resources they need to continue their mission. I'd like to turn it over to our partners at GIAA to begin.
Hey, and good morning, Senator Shelton. I am John M. Kinatsa. I'm the Executive Manager for the airport, and I will lead off this presentation this morning. Half a day and good morning, Honorable Senator Amanda Shelton, Legislative Secretary and Chairwoman on the Committee on Air Transportation. Also, additional greetings to our Honorable Senator Mary Camacho Torres, our Senator Teloti Taidagui, and of course, our Honorable Senator Joanne Brown. Thank you for joining us this morning. With me today and our our Guam Airport Management Team. I have Dr. Ricky Hernandez, our Deputy Executive Manager, our Air Terminal Manager, Mr. Juan Regis, our Airport Consultant, Mr. Frank Santos, our Airport Services Manager, Miss Jean Ariola, and our Acting Assistant Controller, Miss Ann Bautista. Guam International Airport Authority is happy to share key information on airport's current status. As we start this presentation, it is necessary to state that this pandemic dealt a heavy blow and significantly impacted our operations. The combination of negative travel demand, ever-changing travel restrictions, and quarantine policies continues to affect our partners, airlines, and their resumption to pre-COVID-19 frequencies. The uncertainty around the recovery of air transportation has also impacted industry support services that did not spare our tenants. Some who have either suspended operations or have yet to resume any level of service they previously provided. In addition to these challenges, the air transportation sector has had to change its methods of operations to align with the new travel environment for the safety and security of our workers, our travelers, airport patrons, and the entire community. This presentation has three key parts. First, our COVID-19 response and its financial and operational impacts. Second, our capital improvement projects currently ongoing. And third, a look at what lies ahead in our efforts to recover and an update to our master plan and revenue diversification to gain financial footing in this uncertain environment. We look forward to constructive discussions on the information provided and appreciate the forum to share what GIAA is doing to maintain, develop, and expand Guam's only civilian airport and key asset to this government of Guam. And with that, let's start with the bottom line, our finances. And this will be presented by our Deputy Executive Manager, Dr. Ricky Hernandez.
Thank you, Executive Manager Kanata, and thank you, Chairperson Senator Shelton, as well as Senators Camacho Torres, Taitigui, and Brown for joining us this morning. And we're delighted to be able to provide this update to you. The first slide we wanted to go over really is an important slide that speaks volumes as to what we've experienced throughout the pandemic. The slide that is in front of you currently is of our total revenues for fiscal years 2019 through 2021. And it shows basically the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic directly on our revenues. If you were to think about what government agency in the government of Guam was directly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, you don't have to look far beyond the airport. And because we are an airport that operates basically like a mini city, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it is an airport that continues to need to be operational for the traveling public, whether or not we have one flight a day or 100 flights a day. What you do have on the slide in front of you is the left bar is representative of fiscal year 2019 actual total revenues the airport collected at 79.2 million. In fiscal year 20, that's when we felt the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic about mid-year, and we collected about 63.01 million in fiscal year 20, a reduction of approximately 20%. In fiscal year 21, unaudited, as we go through our audit process, we're looking at revenues, a substantial decrease to about $43.77 million for the most recent fiscal year that ended on September 30th. The total revenue decrease from fiscal year 19 is approximately 44.7%, and indicates the major challenge that we faced over the last 18 months. And we wanted to start off with this slide just to reflect and show the impact the pandemic has had directly on airport revenues and our operations. You will notice that there are different colors on the bar charts. The blue represents our Signatory Airlines rents and fees that we charge to our airline partners to be able to run the airport on behalf of them, as well as all of our tenants and vendors. The orange part of the graph or the bar charts are the revenues other than the Signatory airline rents. And that includes a lot of our non-aeronautical revenues, including concessions, as well as our leases that we have of not only our land, but also our terminal building leases that are outside of airline operations. The gray color of the bars are the passenger facility charges that are authorized to be collected by federal law. And the yellow part is the one that has been somewhat of a saving grace to the airport. And those are the federal operational federal funds that we have been able to receive through multiple federal legislations that are direct operational federal grants for the airport that we'll go over in a little bit. In fiscal year 20, we were able to request drawdown and reimbursement of about 15 million in federal operational funding. In fiscal year 21, we had to pull a little bit more because we had a full year of impact of COVID-19 pandemic. And we drew down about 20 million in fiscal year 21 to date. So in total, we wanted to really just start off with this slide to express the impact that COVID-19 has had on the airport and how we have been able to address this impact and in terms of the use of federal funds. And as we go through the next few slides to show what we could do that was within the airport's control to be able to bridge this revenue reduction gap. And so if I can move on to the next slide. As we know, the other part of our financial statements is our operations and maintenance expenses. So what you have in front of you is the green line represents the total operation and maintenance expenses, both budgeted on the left side for fiscal year 20, which was budgeted originally at 53.29 million in O&M expenses. The middle portion of the green line is our actual expenses for fiscal year 20 at $42.6 million. And then on the right side of that green line, the total expenses for fiscal year 21 to be about 33.8 million in O&M expenses. And so we wanted to show this slide simply to show what we could control as it relates to addressing the reduction of revenue as a result of the pandemic. The bar charts below present the breakdown of these O&M expenses, where you see the blue bar representing our personnel services, the orange bar representing contractual services, the gray representing materials and supplies, the yellow in some cases where you can slightly see it, our equipment, and the lighter blue shade on the far right of each section representing other operating expenses. And as you can see, in fiscal year 20, we were able to adjust spending downward from what was originally budgeted by about 20% or over $10 million. And that was as a result of our ability to readjust to the changing environment. And we were able to adjust some of our contracts due to the reduction in the need for items such as maintenance expenses, repairs, and so forth. And we were able to reduce contractual expenses as well. In fiscal year 21, we were able to reduce that quite significantly by another 20% on top of the previous 20% reduction to 33.8 million. And that was as a result of our ability to reduce contractual expenses, as well as hold the line on spending on personnel services as personnel retire, resign, or separate, or otherwise separate from the airport. We held off as much as possible, and ensuring that we prioritize safety and security of the airport, we were able to push off some of those filling of those vacant positions to a later date. As a result of our reduction in contractual services, we were also able to bridge this revenue reduction gap. But we do have to say that this amount of spending has been the lowest in over a decade. And it's something that we believe may be unsustainable as it relates to the uncertainty and the potential for fiscal year 22 to have a rebound. And so as we see passenger arrivals increasing, we will have to be increasing some of the contracts we were able to work out with our contractors to reduce. In addition to that, and we'll talk about this later on in the presentation, we're actually adding tens of thousands of square feet to the airport, and they are coming online all this fiscal year to include our third floor corridor and our aircraft rescue and firefighting facility, which all comes with additional costs to include power costs, water costs, as well as insurance and maintenance costs. And so I wanted to make that, to reiterate that point that although we have been able to reduce our spending, that the reduction in spending has put off a lot of things, including preventive maintenance and equipment repair that may need to be done in fiscal year 22. But overall, I guess the theme of the slide is really that what is within our control, and that is our ability to reduce spending to meet the needs of the traveling public safely and securely, but also to address the severe revenue reduction we've experienced over the last 18 months. So with that, I will move on to the next slide, our operational federal funding. And so this slide, I'll just be discussing a summary of what the airport has received in operational federal funding to date, and essentially how much we've spent and what our plans are with the remaining funds. And so the first operational federal fund funding we received was from the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, otherwise known as the CARES Act. We received $20.7 million in fiscal year 2020. And when I say receive, we were able to draw down those funds. And so we have to spend the funds, and then we're able to draw them down as a reimbursement for operation and maintenance expenses, including debt service. And so we spent about $14.7 million of those funds in fiscal year 2020 and spent the remaining amount in fiscal year 2021. The second, the CARES Act appropriated, the federal government appropriated $10 billion directly to airports for this purpose, which included a requirement of employee retention, which was what we believe to be a employment retention requirement so that jobs were preserved throughout the pandemic. The second federal funding opportunity that we were provided through a formula, basically, is the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, which we call CRRSA. The airport received $5.56 million in fiscal year 2021. In addition to that, we received $396,000 for what was considered concession, or what is considered concessions relief. To date, we've drawn down all of these funds for fiscal year 2021 and used those for operations, including items for concessions relief. The Congress appropriated just $2 billion to airports, which equated to a formula receipt of this amount for CRRSA. And similarly, the American Rescue Plan Act, or the ARFF Act, provided airport rescue grants. The Congress appropriated $8 billion to airports directly. This is outside of any other ARPA funds, because I do understand ARPA included a lot of other types of grants provided to governments. Our allocation for the American Rescue Plan was $14.4 million, with an additional $1.5 million for concessions relief. And we have drawn down about half of this total for fiscal year 2021, which equates to the $20 million in the previous slide that we received or drew down in fiscal year 21 to ensure we were able to continue to operate the airport. And the remaining amount, about $8 million, we have budgeted and plan to use in fiscal year 2022. And so if you take a look at the use of funds of the over 40 million that the airport is receiving, the way we have allocated it is about 15 million was spent in fiscal year 20, where we had a half-year impact of COVID-19 on arrivals. 20 million in fiscal year 21, where we had a full year impact of the pandemic on arrivals. And we have just allocated 8 million for fiscal year 22, because that's all that is remaining. And so we are optimistic, but we do hope that there is a recovery toward the back end of the fiscal year, so that the pressures on our finances are addressed accordingly. And so with that, the next slide I have here is the bond refunding and restructuring. And so this is something that was within our control, and special thanks really to the Guam legislature and the enactment of Public Law 35-137 that authorized the airport to issue taxable refunding bonds. And so we were able to take that, that was authorized and enacted on January 4th, 2021. The refunding on those bonds closed just a couple months ago on August 17th. And I just wanted to report, I know we've issued press releases on this, but just to report in summary, the outcome of that taxable refunding bond, those taxable refunding bonds that we issued. It was in the amount of 143 million in taxable refunding revenue bonds, which from what I understand is one of the largest offerings of taxable refunding bonds the government of Guam has had in a while. And so the government of Guam typically does a mixture of tax exempt or AMT or taxable refunding bonds, but this one was a large tranche of taxable refunding bonds, which actually received quite a bit of interest from investors even during the pandemic. The total net present value savings was obviously 2% as required by law, and that equated to over $3 million in interest savings. We do like to mention this, that we received over 2.6 billion in orders for the 143 million, and that came from 44 different investor firms. That represents an 18.1 times oversubscription, which just simply means that there was a lot of interest in the airport bonds, which is a testament to the confidence that investors have in the airport and its ability to manage through the pandemic, as well as the government of Guam generally, because credit ratings for the government of Guam obviously impact the airport's credit ratings. But the second part of this slide is really the part where we were able to adjust downward our debt service payments. These aren't savings. These are debt service reduction, payment reductions. And so I do want to note that this bond refunding was not a new money bond. And so that means we did not receive new cash for the airport. And so all we've done was took existing bonds and refunded it using better interest rates that we were able to achieve. And so in fiscal year 21, we were able to restructure our debt service from a 13.7 million debt service payment down to a 6.9 million debt service payment. In fiscal year 22 and 23, we were able to keep that debt service down to a little over $8 million per year. And in fiscal year 24, it increases a little bit, but it would have been much higher, obviously, if we had not been able to restructure our debt service payments. And you'll notice that the way we were able to, the timing in which we restructured this debt service payments provides us the most flexibility during the most uncertain time of the pandemic through fiscal year 2024. Otherwise, the debt service may have been much higher. I believe it would have been about 23 million during some of these periods. And so our ability to reduce debt service helps us bridge the gap in our revenue reduction. Doesn't necessarily give us extra cash. It's only going to give us extra cash if we collect more than what we anticipate. And so with that, in summary, we've gone over the revenues reduction, the O&M expense reductions that were within our control, how we've used the federal funds to leverage and ensure that the airport remains safe and secure, open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and as well as how we have been able to creatively refund and restructure our debt service so that throughout the period of time in which we believe the recovery will pick up. And so with that, I will hand it over back to our executive manager, John Kanata, to continue the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hernandez. And in the next few slides, I want to take you through our current operations. This slide provides a snapshot of where we are in our current schedule and resumptions on the horizon. Currently, we have 35 scheduled passenger flights, up from 31 flights in September. Total weekly seat capacity of 7,366, up from 7,084 weekly seats in September. This is serviced by 5 airlines: United, Philippine Airlines, Korean Airlines, Jin Air, and T-Way, who fly to 9 destinations: Honolulu, Manila, Narita, Saipan, Incheon, Yap, Palau, Chuuk, and Pohnpei. We anticipate the following resumptions of services according to schedules received. Jeju Air will go 2 times weekly from Incheon beginning in November. Air Seoul 2 times weekly from Incheon beginning in November. And Air Busan 2 times weekly from Busan beginning in November. China Airlines and Japan Airlines services remain suspended through October and November, respectively. This slide shows the flight activity by month in the last 3 fiscal years. The blue line represents flight operations pre-COVID in FY2019, where we averaged 4,544 flights monthly, peaking at over 5,000 flights a month. The orange line represents flight activity in fiscal year 2020. We forecasted a record-breaking year and had even exceeded FY2019 numbers in January, as can be seen in this chart. You can see that the immediate decline in flight activity once COVID-19 started affecting our travel markets in January and February of 2020. The gray line represents flight activity through fiscal year 2021. Flight activity has remained fairly flat with an average of 1,022 monthly flights, about 25% of pre-COVID flight activity in fiscal year 2019. This chart looks at our passenger activity, mirroring the prior slide. In the airport industry, we derive our revenues from in-plane passengers versus passenger arrivals. In-plane passengers are passengers who board the Guam International Airport, so we can look at departures and transits, which the above chart captures. The blue line represents fiscal year 2019, where we average 157,000 monthly enplanements and peaking at 183 enplanements in our summer month of August. The orange line represents fiscal year 2020, again showing drastic decline when the COVID-19 pandemic reached our travel markets and eventually our shores. The gray line represents passenger activity through our fiscal year 2021, remaining relatively flat, averaging about 11,000 passengers monthly. In summary, our passenger levels are only at 7% of pre-COVID-19 passenger activity. This slide shows our mail and cargo performance over the past fiscal years, and is interesting as it provides insight to how the airline industry had to pivot its operations in support of the pandemic. The blue line, representing FY2019, pre-COVID-19, shows an average of 1,640 metric tons of cargo and mail received monthly at GIAA. The orange line represents FY2020, shows mail and cargo following the previous year's trend, with a minor dip in metric tonnage in February and March, and then a huge uptick in mail and cargo from mid-March. This clearly shows how the air cargo was essential throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and is playing what played a pivotal role in the transport of essential goods and supporting the rise in e-commerce. Many airlines reconfigured their passenger cabins to cargo and to include many of the United aircraft transiting through Guam to points in Asia. The gray line shows continued increase in activity in cargo and mail passing through the Guam airport. In this part of the presentation, we take a look at how GIA had to meet changes in the travel environment as a result of COVID-19. The most noticeable difference are enhanced facilities and implementation of the new processes for the safety and security of all who utilize the airport for work or travel. As we go through the following slides, increased wait times are seen to be a byproduct of processes currently in place for verification of entry requirements and documentation assessments aligned with the current quarantine protocols. To operate in the new environment, the airport assessed capacity of terminal areas, developed new processes, enhanced facilities, and implemented new measures aligned with the international, federal, and local health policies. In development of these practices, the airport authority, along with our airlines and tenants, were comprehensive in its approach and adoption, enabling us to acquire industry accreditation and safe travel designation and package all these elements under the We Care program. The Guam Airport launches We Care program in May of 2020, and with the end goal to effectively operate safely and securely in this new travel environment. The program incorporates facility enhancements, social distancing, sanitation and disinfection, queuing systems, thermal screening and utilization of technology, and corporate governance as key elements in creating this safe and secure environment. For a quick run through of the program, face masks are required for terminal entry and aligns to both local ordinance and federal health requirements. Enhanced disinfection and sanitation is in place throughout the terminal and at passenger touch points for both arrivals and departures, with electrostatic fogging, ultraviolet lighting in the air handling units, and frequent cleaning by contractors. Controlled entry controls the flow of persons and ensures passengers and patrons go through a thermal screening temperature check. Separation barriers and/or sneeze guards have been installed throughout the terminal at each passenger touch point or service counter. Passenger queuing and social distancing methods were developed by terminal-wide capacity assessments to align to health guidance. Having developed a comprehensive We Care program, the Guam International Airport Authority was able to obtain the Safe Travel designation from the World Travel and Tourism Council and health accreditation from the Airports Council International. In fact, the Guam Airport became the first U.S. airport in the Micronesian and Polynesian region to receive international recognition, having fully demonstrated our health and safety protocols aligned with World Health Organization and the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and met the guidance and best practices put forth by the aviation industry response to pandemic protocols and standards by Airports Council International and International Civil Aviation Organization. GIAA received the Safe Travel stamps in June of 2020 before GVB and the rest of the industry attained their stamps. And after an independent third-party review of the airport's protocols and processes from curb to cabin, the Guam Airport received qualified accreditations under the Airports Council International Health Accreditation Program in April of 2021. Our achievements were prominently highlighted and recognized in the FAA's Western Pacific Regional District Office quarterly newsletter. Now we will turn our attention to updates of processing of arriving passengers. All arriving passengers can anticipate 3 vetting stations. Because of the new policies and processes, there has been an impact to passenger processing times. The first vetting takes place at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Hall. Pre-COVID-19, passengers processing times in the U.S. CBP Hall was an issue as paper forms and manual vetting of passports were inspected by officers. But in June of 2021, the U.S. CBP implemented the use of biometrics under its Simplified Arrival program. Simplified Arrival is an enhanced international arrival process that uses facial biometrics to automate the manual documentation checks that are already required for admission into the United States. This process provides travelers with a touchless process that further secures and streamlines international arrivals while fulfilling a long-standing congressional mandate to biometrically record the entry and exit of non-citizens. The second passenger vetting station is the Public Health Quarantine Assessment Desk, where public health officers vet documentation and considers final disposition of passengers under current quarantine protocols. Public health and quarantine officials will review passenger vaccination and other documentation records, will provide verbal instructions and or even briefing arriving passengers under current quarantine protocols, and may require additional documentation dependent upon classification, and may further coordinate with transportation officials and military forces as respective situations warrant. Public Health has provided access to download instructions and health declaration forms for filling out prior to arrival on their website. The third and final stations for passenger vetting takes place with Guam Customs and Quarantine. Electronic customs declaration forms are available for download, and customs electronic declaration kiosks are also available for passengers to electronically record their passenger data and present a QR code to the customs officer, indicating they fulfill passenger information requirements. For the next slide on regulatory updates, I will hand it off to our terminal manager, Mr. Juan Regis.
Okay. Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members, and participating senators. Juan Regis, Air Terminal Manager. I'm pleased to report on the regulatory updates with regard to GA. Despite the challenges with the pandemic, as required under 14 CFR Part 139, GA continues to maintain its airport operating certificate despite the challenges, allowing for uninterrupted operations of scheduled, non-scheduled passenger air cargo services, cargo, drop-in, tech stops, general aviation, and military aircraft operations. With that said, GI continues to work with the FAA in the scheduling of its annual FAA certification inspection, which was slated for July, to which it was delayed until further notice. Nonetheless, GI continues to maintain its requirements with its administrative programs, which encompasses 80 fields as it relates to airfield markings, signage, lightings, pavement conditions, airport conditioning reporting, and aircraft rescue firefighting, just to name a few. To add to our success despite the challenges, GI recently completed the required training under wildlife hazard management and airport self-inspections, and are currently working on the required airport emergency review, which includes revising and strengthening the hazard-specific response to contagious diseases.
Thank you, Juan. And now for an update for our capital improvement projects, I would like to call on Mr. Frank Santos to take us through what we have ongoing. Frank?
Thank you, Executive Manager. Good morning, Madam Chair and Senators. I'm Frank Santos, Airports Consultant. I'm pleased to provide an update of the airport's capital improvement projects. Next slide, please. The first one is the security screening expansion. Not too long ago in 2019, as the Executive Manager presented, that we had almost record passengers and record flights. The congested peak periods resulted in long lines for passengers to be screened by Transportation Security Administration personnel. Fortunately, earlier this year, we completed the security screening expansion by adding 2 new lanes with room for a third. The existing 5 lanes were also improved for efficiency and capacity. TSA funded the new equipment with state-of-the-art technology. It's presently operating the new lanes that can process an additional 300 passengers per hour. The airport recently limited the TSA screening level to ticketed passengers only to optimize the queuing space. Next slide, please. This one everyone's familiar with, but let me provide more information on it. But after 4 years, one of our largest and most complex projects is nearing completion, which is the end of this year or December 31st, 2021. The contractor recently completed phase 2A this past September 30th with 2 pods and 4 aircraft contact gates. The left photo on the slide is the future United Club and the exterior on the ocean side. The right photo is the remaining corridor work to be completed. And then as you can see on the right, there's a structural X bracing. We essentially have less than 10% of work remaining. Let's move on to the next slide, please. This slide shows areas that we have completed or work in progress. Everything on the green is completed work. In orange is work in progress. What appears to be a single terminal is actually 9 buildings separated by expansion joints. Each building had to be structurally retrofitted or structural bracings installed from the ground up in order before any loads or weight can be put on for the 3rd level. Now you're wondering, we're also at the last session we had, we mentioned pods. A pod is not an acronym. It simply means a building extension that would house the stairs, the elevator, and the escalators. But there was no room in the current terminal footprint to add those. Otherwise, we would not have any passenger hold rooms or passenger seating. So what occurs is that as a passenger exits the aircraft, enter the loading bridge, they either enter directly into a pod or go through a series of corridors that ends up at a pod, then goes upstairs to the 3rd floor, which would then eventually bring them to the Customs and Border Protection area. Phase 1, which was completed in February of 2021, includes 2 pods and 6 contact gates. When I say contact gates, these are gates that have loading bridges on them. Phase 2, which I just mentioned, added 2 pods and 4 gates. Then the remaining work would then add 1 pod that will serve 6 gates. It is important to note that although we consider this a 3rd floor project, the bulk of the work is structural also. Every area, every airline, every tenant was impacted by this project, which means it's taken over 4 years. It also, we were doing all this construction while we were still operating. What will happen at the completion? Number 1, it would open up the concourse level to other business opportunities. Number 2, it would increase the passenger experience. And number 3, and most importantly, we finally can get rid of those ugly gray partitions. Next slide, please. The 3rd project is a new construction for a new facility for the Aircraft Rescue and Firefighting Division. The old facility was, which they're currently operating from, is an old Navy facility consisting of several buildings attached to one another. It does not meet the code. The new facility will be modern and it will comply with FAA regulations and circulars. The funding is at 90% with FAA money. The topping off will occur this month. And we expect completion of our facility to be February 15, 2022, a few short months away. Next slide, please. This project involves our primary runway, which is runway 6 left, 24 right. That runway length is 12,000 feet. We're going to rehabilitating certain portions of the runway in phases. Phase 1A and phase 1B address the Portland concrete cement PCC, and that would be rehabilitated. That work would be completed in the second quarter of calendar year 2022, or at the end of the first quarter, actually. Just for those two phases. There's a phase 2 that is pending contract execution and NTP, and that should be complete no later than the summer of 2022. This project is 100% funded by the FAA. If I go on further, and I'll address the airport look ahead. Next slide, please. The master plan update. We will commence an update to the airport master plan by the end of this month with the selected planning firm, AECOM. The FAA will authorize the notice to proceed after execution of an agreement. The update is funded 100% by the FAA and will have a duration of 18 months to subsequent FAA approval. The last master plan update we had was 2012. There are multiple program elements, but that's listed there. But our key focus will be on the forecast of flight activity and passengers. Notwithstanding that we're in a pandemic, we would consider the growth pre-pandemic period. So the key focus is on the forecast of flight activity and passengers. This projected demand will translate into new facility requirements, whether an extension to the terminal building or other facilities that in support. There will be environmental reviews. There will be public involvement sessions. And finally, cost estimates and the schedule will be considerations for a finance plan. The master plan is the airport's CAPEX, Capital Improvement Program roadmap. But since planning is a continuous process, there is flexibility to adapt to changing conditions. The next item is the spaceport. The spaceport designation will involve a license from the FAA for a launch site. We are presently in the pre-application phase. This involves a land-based vertical rocket launch will not be feasible for our airport because of our location and our surrounding communities. However, the operation proposed by Virgin Orbit VO, a Richard Branson company, is a underwing captive carry where a Boeing 747 has a rocket underneath the wing and takes off from the airport like any other aircraft. The rocket will be released in air above open water. Small satellites will be deployed when the rocket reaches orbit. VO has addressed a sonic boom analysis and marine life impacts below the release site, and it's made part of the FAA-approved environmental assessment for the proposed military operations at Anderson Air Force Base. VO is also in the FAA pre-application phase for a launch vehicle license. summer of 2022 is a target launch date. The spaceport is also a industry of interest with the Economic Diversification Task Force. So hopefully that will lead to further business opportunities. Thank you. I would like to turn it over to Dr. Hernandez, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Last piece. CIP initiatives for FY 2022. And the first part is terminal aprons and taxiway rehabilitation. Aprons are where the aircraft sits around the terminal building. And of course, it's designed to make sure that we can handle the weight. The taxiway is a concrete or pavement that leads from the aprons to the runways. In order to increase useful life and minimize foreign object damage from deteriorating pavement, we're going to be rehabilitating all those areas on a phased basis so we can continue airport operations and also in line with available FA funding. So our intent is to bid out this project during the summer of 2022. The next project is cargo apron and fuel line extension. Presently, we don't have any aprons dedicated to cargo aircraft with fuel hydrant capability. So our objective here is to seek federal funds just for the design. And if possible, and there's money left over, like for example, through the infrastructure legislation, then we will start construction of that. The Part 150 noise study, the last study was done in the early 2000s. This involves the soundproofing of our residential homes in our adjoining communities. To date, we have soundproof over 200 homes. However, the FAA has changed the programs and standards that will lead to a noise exposure map. So the Part 150 noise study, as updated, will update that map. And we'll make a determination as to any further residential homes that require soundproofing. And lastly, we're in terms of sustainability, we are applying for zero emissions vehicles, as well as the infrastructure for those, which includes the charging stations. At this time, I would like to hand it off to Dr. Hernandez for discussion on the revenue diversification.
All right, thanks, Mr. Santos. And just to kind of ensure that we're on we're all on the same page in terms of the look ahead. Mr. Santos had mentioned our master plan update, which is going to be extremely vital to our future needs in terms of capital projects, and also then discuss some of our additional CIP plans. And moving forward, we wanted to kind of talk about the concept or the topic of revenue diversification. And in order to do that is really just to kind of talk about where and what type of revenues the airport collects. And so here's some of the major items as it relates to airport revenues. We do have our airline rates and charges that we charge to airlines, which we typically classify as aeronautical revenues. These are the charges we'll go over in a little bit more detail on the next slide. We do have concessions. So these are our general merchandise concessions, as well as our F&B, in-flight catering, and rental car concessions, which we all consider non-aeronautical revenues. And then we have our aviation-related leases. These are obviously the leases related to our airlines, which mainly are in the terminal building, which are considered aeronautical revenues. And we have our non-aviation leases, which are non-aeronautical in nature. And then we have all of our other types of revenue sources, which include other types of concessions I didn't already mention, as well as ground transportation leases and so forth. Historically, aeronautical revenues have averaged about a little over 50% of the total revenues the airport generates, and non-aeronautical revenues, the other half of that, a little less, 47%. In recent years, though, and we don't have it up on the slide, but in recent years, obviously with the federal funds that we've received, which is unique to any other prior year, we've seen that the federal funds, in terms of our operations, have equated to a significant amount of our total revenues. And that's simply because we wanted to ensure that we were able to bridge that gap, and we leverage those to ensure we continue to have the airport operating 24/7. We move on to the next slide. So aeronautical versus non-aeronautical revenues is really where we're looking to diversify. And because we have a large portion of our revenue base reliant upon airline revenues or aeronautical revenues, I wanted to kind of express and show the significant decline in Signatory airline revenues and our reliance on it, and how revenue diversification will help us in terms of ensuring that we can kind of not pandemic proof, but at least lower our event risk, such as a pandemic, on the operations of the airport. And so what you have in front of you is really just a comparison of fiscal years 19 through 2021, specifically targeting our Signatory airline revenues. The multiple colors here represent the different types of Signatory airline revenues that we collect. We have our terminal building rentals, which are based on square footage, cost per square foot. We have our arrivals fees, departures fees, immigration inspection fees, and common use ticket counter fees, which are based on the number of passengers, depending on whether it's coming from a domestic or an international point. And we have our apron use fees, as well as our landing fees, which are based on the gross takeoff weight of 1,000 pounds of the aircraft, and apron fees depending on how long they're actually parked at the gate. And lastly, in the green, our loading bridge use fees, which are just based on each use of our loading bridges to ensure we cover and recoup the cost of those fees that maintain the loading bridges. And so you'll notice a significant decline from 34 million in fiscal year 19 down to just 6 million, just over 6 million in fiscal year 21, which shows really the reliance on Signatory airline revenues and how we've been able to leverage those federal funds to bridge this quite large gap. And so this is just kind of a pictorial depiction of our reliance on it, and kind of just wanted to show this to express the need for revenue diversification. And so if we move on to the next slide, really, why is revenue diversification needed? It does provide the airport increased financial stability. And so with a lesser reliance or an ability to increase our non-aeronautical revenues, it places less or it reduces our event risk as it relates to the impacts that we've experienced with the COVID-19 pandemic on our aeronautical revenues. Provides a strong framework to drive revenues and reduce airline costs. And the reason why it obviously it drives revenues if you're able to diversify revenues, but it also reduces airline costs simply because our fees and charges that are charged to airlines are also take into consideration non-aeronautical revenues. And so the more non-aeronautical revenues we do have, the more competitive we can be as it relates to fees and charges we charge to airlines. It also reduces the business risks during economic downturns, and that's I think quite obvious. But it also increases our ability to provide a positive customer experience. And so with more funds, we can increase the offerings to our traveling public through providing business opportunities to the private sector within the terminal building through concessions. It also provides a source of income for operations and infrastructure improvements. And so any additional funds, obviously, I may have mentioned it before, but the airport is really built on capital improvement so that we can continue to provide a positive customer experience to our traveling public, as well as to ensure that we grow with the needs of the island and the economy. Attracts new business interests, I mentioned a little earlier, as well as broadens the tenant mix that we have at the airport. And so being able to broaden the tenant mix, meaning our ability to be able to leverage our assets, including land that we have here at the airport, will help us increase our non-aeronautical revenues. And so with the next slide we have here, it's just some recommendations for, and some plans, I guess, we do have pending some assistance as it relates to some of the impediments that we have experienced. So revenue diversification, if we kind of just really focus on the non-aeronautical side, the leasing of airport property for a term that is sufficient to recoup tenant investment, it has been somewhat of an impediment for our ability to increase our diversify our revenue base. And there is existing law that does not prohibit, but makes it less likely that interested investors may want to invest in airport land. And so we do have recommendations as it relates to trying to improve upon those existing laws. But we have seen interest in land, but then the obvious disinterest after seeing what requirements are needed under existing law as it relates to exceptional term lease agreements and requirements. And so there are some, we have had some interest over the last several years subsequent to the law having changed. And that includes a lot of general aviation interest related to indoor diving operations, flight kitchen relocation options, hangar space, moving aeronautical related headquarters to our industrial park here at the airport, as well as some helicopter maintenance hangar opportunities, pet motels for traveling public, as well as additional catering facilities, and just to name a few. So there have been some interest and inquiries, but obviously, as we try to look for investors that may want to invest in the construction of possibly buildings, the current 5-year authorization provided to the airport is not a sufficient time for tenants to be able to recoup that investment. And when they see what is required to lease beyond that term, there is some hesitancy from some of the investors to go through that process and then obviously look to private lands to basically meet their needs. The other one we have here is really public-private partnerships and or what we call P3s. And really P3 is not necessarily something as a funding solution, but it's really something the airport has done, and it has many definitions, but it's really to be able to share the risk of possibly construction of facilities or providing of services to the airport. And so we are looking into the possibility of this and looking at some of the possible impediments, which include the ability to lease property beyond 5 years without the need to go through what many investors appear to perceive them as a cumbersome process. But P3s allow us to share the risk as it relates to providing of a service or the construction of a building or the maintenance of facilities, as well as we're able to share on the cost and find financing that may not be necessarily available to the airport, but could be leveraged from the private sector. Additionally, we do have concessions as a potential here, because obviously concessions, as we mentioned before, is a non-aeronautical activity. And so our ability, as Mr. Santos mentioned, to take down the gray barriers within the concourse and now be able to leverage all of that space for additional revenue generating possibilities is something we're looking forward to. But that also comes with some challenges, because the airport may not be able to invest our own funds in reconstructing some parts of that. And therefore we have to rely upon our private sector partners to be able to do that. And so, but we are excited for the possibilities, and we do hope that there are, some positive arrivals that kind of start to trickle in throughout this fiscal year. In addition, we have general aviation, which is just a diversified range of activities that encompass all segments of the aviation industry, excluding commercial air carriers in the military. And these can be for business or recreation, or just simply hobbies that maybe individuals or companies may have. And general aviation really exists on Guam currently exists on Guam really with flight training, some skydiving activities, and some fixed base operations. But we believe it is an underserved sector of the aviation community that could be leveraged in terms of diversifying our revenue base. And so with that, I just wanted to close this section with, the airport really is managing with all of our resources at the most uncertain time in our history. And we have plans to diversify our revenues and may need some policy assistance to allow us to avail of the highest and best use opportunities from investors. We do need to continue to diversify and reduce our risks to events like this pandemic, all while increasing the value of the airport and the quality of life in the region, as well as trying to achieve these goals by pursuing federal funding opportunities that may arise in the near future. And I think I'll try and quote, I'm not sure I can quote him very well, but our chairman, Brian Bomba, just by saying, just like an aircraft taking off, our recovery really won't be immediate. It'll be gradual and take a lot of work, but we know that your airport is committed to doing everything in our power and our control to be able to get to the other side of this pandemic. And so with that, I'll give it back to the executive manager. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman Shelton and members of the committee. That concludes our presentation for GIA, and we'll be here or we'll be available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much to everyone for that presentation. I think we covered a lot today, so many updates from the airport. So we really appreciate all of the work that you are doing. Of course, I want to commend the team at GIAA for your work to really adapting to the changing needs of the airport, especially during this very challenging time, and outfitting the airport for safety during the pandemic. I think everything that you showed today is quite impressive to keep our passengers safe and our people safe, and keeping all of our current projects, even pre-pandemic, on track. And seeing those through and working very creatively to reprioritize the needs of the airport, the operations of the airport, even with your decrease in revenues. And so we're thankful for that leadership. And looking ahead at the future, I think you've proposed some great ideas to us. We have a lot to think about and a lot on our plate to work on, and we look forward to working together with you. I'd like to open it up to questions. I have one question for you, Dr. Hernandez. We spoke about the ARP money that the airport received, some directly to the airport that you're drawing down. I want to know if there has been any ARP money received from the administration to the airport, or any plans that you're hearing of that we can expect.
Sure. Thanks, Senator Shelton. Thanks for the question. And it's a good question. We have been in communications with the governor and the administration as it relates to their, I guess, what would be considered discretionary funds received from the American Rescue Plan. And we have shared similar slides as it relates to, or not slides, but the data that backs the slides that show our revenue losses. And so we are awaiting final word in terms of how much, if any, funds can be provided to the airport to help bridge the gap. But we all are aware that the governor is aware of the dire situation as it relates to the potential uncertainty of air traffic returning. And they're well aware of it and have been in communication with us as it relates to how much, but we're not too sure exactly the specific amount. And we are hopeful that it will be enough to get us through the next fiscal year and bridge us to the point in which we are able to see passenger arrivals pick up.
Okay, I think we're all eager to see that as well. We're hopeful that the airport will receive some of those funds. It certainly was jarring to see in your graphs that you provided. I think we've all been tracking that airport arrivals are down and the traffic at the airport is down, but to see the graphs, what we were pre-pandemic in 2018 and 2019, and to just see those staggering drops is really concerning and brings the reality home for us today that there is a lot of work to do. And so we're thankful for that presentation. I'd like to open it up to my colleagues. I'll begin with Senator Titlegy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and for allowing me to go first. I have a prior engagement. Greatly appreciated. And I greatly appreciate and kudos to the Guam Airport Authority for such a great, thorough presentation. Everything was covered. And you know what I like about you, Dr. Hernandez, is that you simplify when it comes to revenues to make it understandable, you know, in layman's terms, so that we know exactly where you're at, where the airport is at financially. And I greatly appreciate it. You know, I did introduce a bill in the 35th Guam legislature that would actually allow what you're trying to do in one of your presentations on, you know, diversifying revenue and allowing for, I believe is leasing airport property. And I'm sure you remember that when, because you did testify, and hopefully we can get that bill introduced again to help the airport in your endeavor to lease out property, because, you know, 5 years for anybody who's putting major investment into a project is a very low amount of years to invest, because you don't start recouping until 5 years after, you know. So let's, I'll introduce that legislation again, and hopefully we'll see, hopefully to see this one through with the help of the chairwoman of the airport. Together we can introduce that legislation, just allowing the airport that flexibility or ability to do so. I'm just going to go on backwards, going back, but the concern I'm having here is the PFC, you know, the passengers arrival, which is about $4.50 per individual that come in that the airport receives in revenue. I have a real great concern because it's significantly low. Is this going to hurt in any way your bond, your debt service payments actually for your bond? How are you addressing that? Through federal funds? Is that what you're doing to cover those costs?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Senator Titlegy. And I do recall the legislation that you did introduce at the beginning of the 35th Guam legislature. And we hope to continue that momentum as it relates to maybe increasing that 10 years to something more, I guess, something more that could generate some more interest by our investors. Related to the debt service inquiry and the PFC, we do have PFC that does apply to the payments of some of those items, but we have been able to address the debt service payment issue because of the reduced revenues. We were able to reduce debt service and cover most of or some of it with federal funds, as well as just revenues that we collect from the airport. So we've been able to address the shortfall or the reduction, the obvious reduction in PFC with just our normal revenue stream, as well as the federal grants.
And Ricky, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't the PFC, is that obligated for your bond services, your debt service? Is that obligated?
Yes, it is. It is.
And with a significant drop, and from what I gather and reading in the paper, and of course this third wave coming about, it's going to take some time. And my biggest concern is also the federal funds are all going to wash out as well. We're going to stop seeing it rain money, you know, for many places, you know, Guam included. And what are we going to do then? You know, it almost gets to a point where you have to think about, to run our airport, it's critical. And it proves it with the increase of cargo and mail that is coming in. What a huge jump. That being said, the legislature or the government is going to have to help subsidize the airport. It's going to get to that point. And I see it getting to that point next year, 2022 in April. And I would hope that the airport has a contingency plan in place and how much funding you're going to need to sustain the operations of the airport, which is very critical at this point. Without federal funding, which I believe is going to end by January of next year, what is the airport going to do? My other question with regard, so yeah, please, I'd love to hear what your contingency plans are moving
Yeah,
forward.
I think just to answer the question, I think we've positioned ourselves with not only the debt service restructuring, where we have debt service probably as low as we've ever had it. It's placed less pressure on our finances and our need to be able to achieve that debt service coverage ratio of 1.25 times our revenues minus our operating expenses. And so we've done that on that side. We've also reduced our operations and maintenance expenses to kind of what we consider an unsustainable point. But I do think that with the governor's commitment on providing some funds, we're hopeful that that will help bridge the gap. And so if we look at what we used in fiscal year 21, we had about 20 million that was set aside from the, or that we drew down from the federal funds. And so we have 8 million set aside for this fiscal year. And so there is a bit of a gap. And if we see some positive arrivals toward what I believe some other GVB has mentioned toward the summer of next year, then hopefully that need may not be as great as the last fiscal year.
It's something, well, thank you so much for that. I know you're doing your due diligence, and when the red flag comes up, I'm sure we're going to hear about that. But I think we should be very, you're continuing to be very frugal with your finances, and I appreciate that. And the innovative thinking of how to generate revenue. Real quick, the state-of-the-art technology on the 3D imaging that was brought up earlier, is that paid for by the airport, or does TSA bring that in, or that was the 3D imaging that you have?
Senator, the equipment that TSA, that is at the TSA checkpoints was paid for by TSA.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Okay, so it's no cost to there. And okay, you know, annually the FAA gives you a annual inspection score. Can you give me that number, Frank? That was, I think, either Frank or somebody else who was talking about FAA. You received one in FY 2019, 2020. What are those scores, and have you received the score for 2021?
2021, ma'am, was actually deferred due to COVID.
Okay.
However, we do have the 2019 results on the certification compliance management information system that is currently showing 0 discrepancies.
In 2019?
Yes, correct.
How about 2020?
2020 was deferred as well. 2020 was deferred as well.
Okay, I was wondering. Okay, because if there was any discrepancy in 2019, I'm sure that you guys did some downtime, you know, without being so busy, you can adjust to those concerns addressed by FAA. But that's good to hear in 2019. My last question, that I have, and I appreciate, yeah, the chairman mentioned about considering making great efforts toward that additional ARC funding through the governor's office. I appreciate it. The last question I have is, because of that increase in cargo and mail that's coming in, that's quite significant. I mean, it's such a huge change compared to the normal in 2019 versus now with cargo, you know, during the pandemic, and probably it'll continue on. There's another word other than pandemic to indicate that this is going to be for the long haul. But what is the airport doing to address this increase in mail and cargo?
I think if I could answer too. For the increase in non-cargo, as the executive manager mentioned, it was really the airlines being creative and retooling their aircraft to ensure that they can continue to employ their workers. So we did see a pretty high increase in cargo and mail, and then there was some kind of increase, ups and downs throughout the last fiscal year. But I think to make cargo sustainable, and that's something we're looking at, and Mr. Santos mentioned increasing our capacity. Well, first off, really needing to improve upon the apron and taxiways, but then also working on the design for additional cargo apron dedicated to that, and as well as getting the fuel lines moved or extended to those cargo aprons. And so those are all projects in the works to be able to expand the offerings at the airport. And I think the revenue diversification, the economic diversification task force is also working. And we've been in discussions with EDA as it relates to some of the potential import-export opportunities that they're working on as well. And so we're in coordination with them on some of the plans that they may have for certain types of exports that may require air cargo instead of sea cargo. So, but we are planning for those.
Okay, I greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to go first too as well. And I look forward to not only the the presentation that was given to us on the fiscal years 20 and 21 financial impact, as well as other diagrams that were provided, but maybe a diagram providing their estimated projections for 2022. If that could be provided to the legislature, just to look at where they believe it's going to go, I greatly appreciate it, because it gives us a kind of a goal to look at and hope that the airport is meeting their projections. And if not, then definitely have to step in to assist the airport. I greatly appreciate it, and thank you so much, everyone, for this very thorough presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair, again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Senator Titlegy. Senator Torres, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to first of all congratulate the Guam International Airport Authority, the management team. You have done an outstanding job of seeing the airport through this very trying time with the significant drop in revenues as a result of COVID. I'm very pleased with your presentation in terms of what you've outlined in your CIP projects and the progress that is made. It's true about the addition of tens of thousands of square feet that, we can't take that for granted. It's substantial what you've done. Also, following through with the ARFF facilities, the noise mitigation, getting health accreditation internationally as well. I was wondering, with regard to the health accreditation, do you also have a concerted effort with GVB in getting Guam designated as a green zone, so that we can encourage continued passenger increases? Is that an ongoing discussion that you're having also with GVB?
Yes, ma'am. So that's a daily discussion that we have. Matter of fact, right before this briefing, we just got some texts from GVB on what we can do to make sure that we meet the demands. And yeah, so we do work diligently and daily with them in coming up with programs to try and entice and enhance our processes here.
Okay. I also wanted to ask Frank Santos, what I didn't hear in this presentation was the status of the Tietzen Highway and any efforts with the Federal Highway Administration on completing what was begun. I know we have different phases, but what is the status of that? Because I know that that's integral to your footprint accommodations, the traffic and further development of the airport properties. Could you just comment on that briefly, please?
Yes, sorry, we forgot to mention it, but it is a Department of Public Works project, of which the airport is collaborating with them in terms of the land necessary for phase 2. As you know, phase 1 is complete. So the airport has done the surveys, has made appraisals for the property that needs to be turned over to DPW in terms of a perpetual easement so that they can continue. We do know that the design of phase 2 is in progress and nearing completion. There is going to be legislation, though, that will be submitted to your body from Public Works or the Attorney General representing Public Works relative to the authorization to sell or for the airport to purchase what they call remnant parcels. And that would assist in mitigating the additional cost of the land acquisition that Public Works needs to do. I don't have a timeline right now, but we do know that at least the design is in progress.
Okay, that's fantastic. And I understand you're also contemplating a revisit of the master plan since it was done initially in 2012, around
Right.
that time that I was still there with you. But I just want to also comment, Ricky, thank you very much for answering the question about what the legislature can do to further assist GIAA. I know that was one of the things that I was going to ask you, because clearly the team has a very good grasp on what it needs to do and how it needs to prepare for the tourism recovery and the back to normal, which we can anticipate probably in 23 to 24 per GVB estimate. But we will look to work with you, Mr. Kanata and Mr. Hernandez and Mr. Santos, to make sure that the legislature is also teaming up to facilitate the GIAA going forward. Again, just kudos to all of you. And I'm also very pleased to see that Juan Regis is back on your team. Welcome home, Mr. Regis. It's good to see you back on the team. I
Thanks,
don't have
ma'am.
any further questions other than this was an outstanding presentation, and whatever we can do to facilitate, our Guam airport, I commit to you that we will do all that we can do to assist. Sidus Masi.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Torres, and thank you to my colleagues for their questions today and their comments. I'd like to turn it over back to the executive manager if you have any closing remarks for us today.
Well, once again, thank you, Madam Chair, and also senators that were able to be in our presentation today. Hopefully, this will mark the day that we will possibly get some legislation to you to help GIAA move forward for the next decade. Of course, one of those is our opportunity to hopefully change the lease amount of years to make it where that investors will come in and come in and want to invest in our area. I can imagine Guam. We talked about the air cargo industry. I can imagine and vision Guam having a Amazon hub here on Guam, where that things coming in from Asia are fly in, and are processed here before being redistributed around the world. So if we want to be serious about it, I think we need to seriously look at changing our laws, especially for GIAA and possibly GITA, to give us the opportunity to lure investors to come in and invest in our facilities. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I think there are certainly very exciting possibilities for the airport to come, and we look forward to supporting you in these ways here from the legislature. I'd like to again thank the airport board and management and the entire team at the airport for everything that you continue to do and for this presentation today. And that concludes the Committee on Air Transportation, Parks, Tourism, Higher Education, and the Advancement of Women, Youth, and Senior Citizens virtual informational hearing. The time now is 11:30 a.m. and we are adjourned. Sidus Maasi, everyone, and be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.